Hello, Cadre 3 again. This is your friendly neighborhood professor. Um, I'm at home at this for this film uh, development down in my man cave, which you're all going to see this summer when you come out to the house for a barbecue picnic kind of a social event. Anyway, I'm not in my office. I had my wife watch the first video, and she's very critical of it because she said I went a lot. I'm going to try not to go a lot. We'll see how we do. This one is about systems that enable and disable. There are, I haven't figured out yet how to blend the PowerPoint into it, so there are some PowerPoint slides that if you have a way of watching this as well as working your way through the PowerPoint slides have the same title, Systems That Enable and Disable, might help explain some of what I'm going to be talking about. Principles of systems have to do with the structure of a system, how it's organized, how it's designed, and the two ends of a continuum of systems are linear systems on the one hand and nonlinear or spiral circular systems on the other. And we often think about the circular ones or the spiral ones as being the only kind that are systems, but linear is a system as well. What we mean by linear are the kinds of systems that are step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and so on, or A, B, C, D, E, and so forth. The linear systems tend toward each of the steps becoming a project in and of itself. In other words, step 1 is kind of self-contained, step 2 is self-contained, 3, 4, and on down the line. And one of the problems with the linear systems is there's no way to connect those steps together. And really the only connection is, for example, in step 3, it's connected to step 2 simply because it follows it. It's connected to step 4 because it precedes it. But other than that, there's almost no or a very remote connection to step 1 or step 9, 10 on down the line. And that's one of the major problems with it. When you are doing a linear model relative to something that's a recurring kind of thing, such as the purchasing of new school buses, replacing textbooks, fixing roofs, redoing roofs, that kind of thing, there really isn't any need to have a relationship between each one of those. They're all self-contained. You need to buy a bus, so you pick the best bus you can, you pick the best roofing company, and so on, you move on. And there really isn't a relationship to the steps that preceded it or the steps that follow it. The main thing is simply to keep the thing in sequence so that year 1 you do something, year 2, for example, year 3, and so forth. Another of the issues of a linear system, and isn't necessarily a disabling kind of thing, but there's no self-correcting mechanism in that system. In other words, once step 1 is over with, no matter what happens in step 2, you can't go back and fix step 1. So you find a better way to fix a roof, or you find a better bus, you're still stuck with the roof that you just fixed, or the bus that you just purchased, or the textbook series, or whatever it might happen to be. There is no way to connect or to self-correct those kinds of things, and so the system tends to just proceed on its own. And without those feedback loops, a couple of things tend to happen. The further away you get from the origination, the less meaningful that step is to the whole purpose in the first place. In other words, year 4 just becomes self-contained and a purpose in and of itself, get it completed and so forth. You really don't even look back to the integrity of the whole busing system, how it works, or the whole roofing system, or all of the series of the textbooks, how they fit together across, say, several curriculum areas or disciplines. And so it kind of goes on its own way, as opposed to a connected or nonlinear model that's often described are these circular models that have the circle and then there's different circles around that circle, so you go around, or a spiral model. In fact, some of the current literature talks about the slinky thing that we used to play with as being an example of a system that holds itself together and yet can do lots of things, and the way, depending on how you tip it, how you put pressure on it, and so forth, depends on what is actually going to come out of it. So In a circular or spiraling kind of system, each part is connected to the other part. In other words, it's kind of like gears around a circle, and so you move one gear, and then the other gear has to move to compensate for it, and it moves all the different parts around the system. And basically, that's the most difficult system to lead, because you got to be ready to deal with all the parts that are going to get touched by any kind of intervention in terms of what it is you're trying to accomplish. All the parts are always impacted, and they're impacted all at once, which is the reason why a lot of people really don't try to do much in the way of designing systems, is because they're complicated. They're very intense, they're very impactful on each other, and sometimes you can't predict what those impacts are going to be. The good news of spiral or circular kinds of models is that they can be self-correcting. In other words, as you go around and around the circle and you get back to square one, you can modify, you can adjust, you can adapt square one or circle one before you then go around to circle two the second time. In other words, it's an improvement model. The intention is that as you take each step, you learn more about the step you just left, and when you come around to the circle the next time, you can basically adapt or fix any issues related to that particular one. In the case of the linear model, it's very vulnerable to getting way down the road and having people forget the purpose or why it was there. We ran into this a lot in the Department of Education, for example, in redesigning some of our rules and regulations. And I'll just use the accreditation rule as a very classic example of it, that when we designed it as a systems model, but when it goes out, it's a set of rules and regulations. In other words, the first part of it's about curriculum, the next part's about time, the next part's about certified teachers, the next part, and so forth. And then you get 5, 6, 7 years down the road of its implementation, people forget what you were trying to do, and so each part of it becomes self-contained, kind of in and of itself, an activity, and people don't think about the fact that curriculum and the quality of teachers, or the certification of teachers, the books in the library, the time spent, are all supposed to be connected together to define what in effect is a quality school. And so as long as you can check off, we did this, we did this, we did this, it becomes more linear than it is circular. So you get way down the road on linear models and have people either forget the original reasons, or what they really tend to do is start to invent their own. In other words, we're doing this because, or it must be because of, and then they insert their own attribution to it. In the case of circular or spiral models, they can actually spin out of control, and that's the downside of them, that in the feedback system that it has, depending on the data, sometimes the system can freeze and just spin in place because it just gets the same kind of data, the same information, nothing changes in that, so it just keeps going around and around and around, and it often becomes irrelevant as a result of that constant spinning in place. Or it can actually keep moving and spin so fast it really spins out of control, almost like a centrifugal force kind of model, based upon either not the right data or bad data. I think one of the things that's happening in K-12 right now is that it's starting to spin out of control, because basically trying to improve the system is based on some data that really doesn't match up to our intentions. For example, in the Common Core standards, we want standards that are performance-based. We want them to be literacy-based, so there's math literacy, science literacy, social studies literacy, of course language arts literacy, and that implies that there's understanding, that there's the ability to communicate, and those are high-level kinds of standards. But what we're doing is feeding that system information from more standardized tests than they are performance tests, and as a result, it's giving us information about how students are performing that has nothing to do with the way in which it was intended, and I think that system is spiraling out of control. I don't know how many iterations of standards that we've had both here in Nebraska and on a federal level, but every time it begins to spin and get out too far out of control, someone comes up with the idea we ought to have a new set of standards, and that's where Common Core came from. And I'll guarantee in the next couple of years, if they ever get No Child Left Behind reauthorized or the Higher Education Act reauthorized, we're going to have a new set of standards that go with it. College and Career Ready was an attempt to take the current standards and loop them out to another level. because the current standards weren't addressing the issue of what the being college and career ready was all about. So let me give you a couple of examples of systems that enable and systems that disable. Another word for the term design and systems is box. In other words, everybody thinks in a box. And understanding the box that I'm coming from or the box that you're coming from is critical to us understanding each other, because if I'm thinking one kind of box and you're talking about another kind, often those communications just go by each other. Well, here's an example of the box effect, and this would apply to K-12 system, it applies to any not-for-profit, it applies to post-secondary education, and it's a box that's basically a schooling model. In other words, a schooling box. And the sides of this box that keep it contained are time, because it's fixed, and when time is fixed, in the case of K-12 schools, 1,032 or 1,080 hours, depending on whether it's elementary or secondary, and it's fixed on the basis of grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. It's fixed on the basis of semester courses, 50-minute periods, on and on and on. Time is basically a fixed part of that system. Well, the time then determines the next level of the box across the top, which would be curriculum. There's only so much time, so you can only offer so much curriculum. Whether there needs to be more or not doesn't matter, because you only have so much time to teach it in. If you're a school district of 100 kids, your options are limited to how much you can offer. If you're a school, say a high school of several thousand kids, there's a lot more options there because kids can make choices in that system. But anyway, curriculum is limited by time. And then the next side of the box that box is in is money. The budget gets set in August, and that's the budget that's going to last for the whole year. Doesn't make any difference whether you get more kids, different kids, kids that are more challenging, kids that are less challenging. That's your budget, and you're stuck with that fixed dimension of that box. And then the bottom dimension of the box is organization and governance. And we act as if the organizational patterns such as K through 6 or K through 5, 6-8 middle schools, 9-12 high schools, there's something magical about that. And while there is some research to indicate that those patterns do match kids a little bit better, there's no research data that says they make achievement or instruction more effective just because of the grade level kind of patterns. Many of us graduated from schools that didn't have any structure. It was K through 12, and you just marched your way through, and obviously all of us turned out to be wonderful human beings. Here's the downside of that box, the disabling part of it. Let's say Algebra 1 is something that every kid needs to know. In the schooling box, I'm going to get 180 6-hour days to learn Algebra 1. In other words, 1,080 hours. If I need more, too bad. If I could get it in less, too bad. I'm going to get 180 days. And so my ability as a consumer of Algebra 1 has everything to do with the grade that I'm going to get. If I can consume it on pace with how the curriculum is paced for that year, then I'm probably going to get an A or a B for the most part. If I can't and I need more time, likely my grade is going to start diminishing because I need more time, I need more specialized kind of instruction, and the curriculum only offers Algebra 1 with X teacher. And so that box creates a problem in that any kind of change in that box, and we tinker around with it from time to time. Like, for example, we try to take time and say, all right, maybe we ought to think about year-round schools or longer school days or some other kind of model like a flexible schedule in a high school kind of thing that looks more maybe like a college or a university kind of schedule. And the research is pretty clear. It doesn't matter what it is, because you're only going to get a certain amount of time, and only adding 5 days, 10 days, an hour to the day doesn't seem to really have the effect on achievement that those that propose those kind of ideas would like to see. And so any kind of effect in terms of quality outcome is pretty incremental, pretty limited, and so forth. So if we can't mess around with the sides of that box, lots of people come up with the idea, well, maybe we ought to think outside that box. Come up with all kinds of ideas. And let me use just a couple of them that are becoming so common. They're not really outside the box thinking much anymore, but charter schools and vouchers. Those are outside the box thinking. with the idea that if we could set up charter schools to match kids, we wouldn't schedule it like we do with time and a fixed curriculum and a fixed budget and those kind of things. And yet the research shows absolutely very clear the longer charter schools are in operation, the more they look like traditional public schools, and the impact on achievement of charter schools is limited at best. In fact, about half the charter schools do worse than the public schools, and most of the charter schools at best do about the same and maybe slightly better depending on whether they're specialized, like for just gifted kids or kids that want music or art or something of that type. And so thinking outside the box really doesn't improve the system at all, because it really leaves the system in effect unchanged because of tradition or whatever. Vouchers don't do anything. They're not even a change in that box at all, other than it gives it a different governance cycle. And while we're talking about governance, the fact that we have boards of education, the research says they really don't matter in terms of having an impact on achievement. Their intention and the purpose of them is to be a demonstration of democracy. And I think that's a good thing for them to do. And it's hard, though, for boards of education to realize that the kind of things they do, unless they pay attention to that box in meaningful kinds of ways, really are irrelevant. And probably 90% of the boards don't really know what to do because they keep operationalizing and cementing in place that schooling model, which, when it was designed over 100 years ago, was designed to do educate the top third of our kids to go on into the professions, to be lawyers and doctors, even teachers, but landowners, business owners, and those kind of things. That model was never designed for all of the kids and for all of the kids to do well, and yet that's what we're asking that model to do today. And yet we're cementing it in place with our testing system, with our grade-by-grade standards, and it's probably more cemented in place today than it ever was. And then, you know, we have states, Connecticut, I think, is the most recent one. Massachusetts followed. Florida's right there saying, you know, kids shouldn't move on from third grade to fourth grade until they can master the third grade kind of literacy test. Again, it's a time-based kind of model, and if we're going to hold those kind of finish lines for kids, we need to do the kind of things that are going to make sure that they'll get there, that they can actually get to that finish line. So, the kind of system then that enables, and even though it has some disabling features to it, because they all have both, but it's a predominant one, is called an education box. And so when you can't think outside the box to make radical improvement, you find a new box to think inside of. And so I would propose that we would do a lot better if we'd think about an education box. And so the sides of this education box are, what are the outcomes we want every kid to know? What do we want them to know and be able to do? Then we go over to the other side and design the opportunities so that each child can reach those outcomes. And then students make progress in the system by demonstrating mastery. It doesn't have anything to do with what grade they're in, how old they are. When they demonstrate mastery, they move on in the curriculum. And the way that we balance the opportunities and the outcomes is through a personal learning plan. Every child has an IEP, so to speak, that identifies the outcomes that are desired, what specific learning opportunities they would need. And so if a child, if we're saying every kid needs to get Algebra 1, kid needs 2 years of it, they get 2 years of it. If they only need 6 weeks of it, that's what they get, is 6 weeks according to that plan. And then instead of worrying about the governance and organizational system, then begin to think about it more systemically so that we, just like in the last video, we connect this system, the K-12 system, pre-K to pre-K education, to child care, and to the home. And on the other end, we connect it to continued learning, the world of work, and living in a democratic society. And post-secondary, higher education, not-for-profits need to do the same kind of thing. Think about the outcomes they want and the opportunities within those, and then find a mechanism for bridging that, like a personal learning plan or a strategic plan, it could be, and then reconsidering what the system, how it would be more effective if we connected it at the raw material side and connected to the product side. And that would be called, like I said, an education box. Has very few downsides to it. And I think that if we really are serious about our schools meeting the needs of all kids, we've got to dump the schooling box, get to an education box. We'll probably never get totally to a schooling or away from the schooling box and totally to an education box, but certainly there's a happy medium ground in there that would make the system more effective. That's the end of this video, and there will be another video to follow.